Hey, it's Andrew Bristansky here, and today I'm gonna make you wanna buy this lens. So I've been waiting to try this lens out since the beginning of the year when Voigtlander announced it at, I think it was the end of December 2021, early 2022. And actually when I went to Camtech to play with the M11, I was secretly just hoping to try out the Nokton here because I really wanted to get a feel for it and really wanted to see what it's like after spending so much time with the 50 Noctilux 0.95 aspherical and the TT Artisans 50.95. So here I am today, finally, after spending some time with this beautiful Nokton here. This is the 50mm f1 Voigtlander Nokton aspherical. It is a wonderful lens, and I am honestly blown away by how good it is. I've put it through its paces. I've shot a wedding with it. I shot an engagement shoot. I did a few other photo shoots with it, and I just hung out with it, and I got along with it a lot better than I expected to. I never really gelled 100% with the Noctilux, nor did I with the TT Artisans. For a variety of reasons, I find the speed is actually more of a limiting factor than it is a liberating one. The novelty wore off real quick with those lenses because of their size, and the burden of carrying them around really got in the way at the end, and I prefer my 50 Summilux for a lot of reasons. But now that I've spent some time with this thing, I'm reconsidering my options here because this guy rings in at half the price of a regular Summilux, let alone costing a fraction of the cost of the Noctilux, and it really punches above its price. So let's start with the build quality as usual. It is 9 elements in 7 groups, pretty low considering the image quality of this thing's pumping out. It's got 12 aperture blades. The aperture stops in nice dampened half-stop clicks. From f1 all the way down to f16. The focus throw is very nice and smooth. The black anodized finish feels very nice and luxurious. And Voigtlander finally listened to everybody, and they got rid of the chrome front ring that all the other Cosina lenses have. And I always knew why they kept the chrome ring. It's because if you put on these hoods, they scratch and wear out the anodized finishing over time. Well, they address that too because this hood that comes with it is plastic on the inside. So all the mounting hardware is actually plastic. It's lined with a nice felt dust magnet material on the inside, and the front element is just this massive, beautiful ground glass. So they actually grind this thing like they did with the 50 f1 1.2 Noctilux back in the day. So this thing is pretty state-of-the-art. It is snazzy, and it really fits the bill. So the rear element now, which coming from the Noctilux, I was kind of wondering what design approach they went with this lens. This is a Gauss design, simple, obviously a heavily modified version to just get everything they've managed to put in this thing. And check out that rear element. It comes out. So Sony users, mirrorless users, beware. If you're not using this lens on a Leica mount camera with the proper sensors, you're gonna get some artifacts, increased vignetting, astigmatism, coma, all the usual caveats that you would have from mounting these protruding real element lenses to your cameras. On the M10, it played perfectly fine with it, so I was very happy with that. And the vignette was very tolerable, and it dissipates by the time you get to f4, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So otherwise, the throw is really nice for the focusing, and it focuses down to 0.9 meters, which coming from the Noctilux, I was used to, but coming from my Summilux, I found it limiting, especially after doing a whole wedding with this lens. I really wished it went down to a little closer, like at least 0.7 meters, like all my other lenses do. I understand they're sticking to the code with this, but I kind of wish it did get closer. And they do it for good reason. This lens actually has a floating lens group in it. I think it has a few floating lens groups, to be honest. All that means is basically as you're getting closer to your subject, the lenses align themselves to their optimal positions and you get a sharper image as a result. The 35 Distagon that I'm actually filming this video with does that as well. And so does the FLE Summilux, the 35 Summilux, floating lens groups. I don't have to explain it too much, I hope. But all it means is that this is a very complicated lens, and it just produces fantastic imagery, and wow, does it deliver on that. So it's a chode, to speak. It's wider than it is long, which is hilarious, but it really works out in its favor, because walking around with this lens, especially after spending time with larger lenses for the M mounts, which kind of goes against my philosophy for owning these cameras, which is the sheer size and portability, this lens really found itself in a nice sweet spot, because the fact that it's so receded, it's so balanced as a result, and the lens, all the weight is closer to the mount. And look, check this out. Let's do the test. Let's balance it out. All right, it's front heavy. It's not that bad. Honestly, when you're walking around with it, it could be way worse. It could be the 50 Noctilux. It could be the 90 freaking Summilux, or the 75 Noctilux, which are just like attaching a freaking cannon to the front of your camera. They perform, don't get me wrong, but they're also kind of a burden to walk around with. Whereas with this guy, I did an entire wedding with it around my waist, and I really didn't feel overcome by the weight, which was really welcome. And it weighs in under 500 grams, which, if you're looking at like a chrome Summilux, 50 Summilux spherical, it's going to weigh pretty close to this. I think this thing weighs about 480 grams, and the 50 Summilux in chrome, if I recall, weighs similar to that, maybe 450. Regardless, it's very light for the size. The filter size is 62 mils, which I kind of wish was a different size. I'm used to my 58 mils for my other bigger Voigtlander lenses. Why they went with 62? Probably just for the the aesthetics at that point. But it's annoying to have to get another filter if you get this lens. But that's pretty much the only annoying thing about this lens, because everything else this lens does just does it right. So the image quality is phenomenal. It reminds me so much of my 35 Distagon in all the right ways. So it has an incredible 3D pop, phenomenal sharpness, even at f1. I can't get over that. At infinity, you have a very clean image. Yes, there are some areas where it could be sharper, but the fact that you can shoot and confidently shoot a landscape at f1 really speaks wonders for how well they designed this lens. Voigtlander, really, if you've seen my other videos, that I'm a big advocate for them, especially for the value proposition they offer. This is their halo lens. This is really they've given everything they got in this lens, and it really shows. So yes, handling wise, aesthetically, blah blah blah, it's a good lens to hold and play with and look at. But the images are where this lens really took my breath away. I didn't expect myself to love this lens as much as I did. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to you guys about it in this video, because I walked into this review because I had a lot of people reach out to me, really. A lot of emails, a lot of messages, a lot of comments about asking me to try this lens. And I've been very excited to try it out. And here we are, and it really, really delivers. The images it produces are lifelike, they're dreamy, they remind me of a hybrid between the modern charm of the 35 Distagon that I'm shooting on, and also the Noctilux, the 50 Noctilux 0.95, with a kind of a more classic bokeh than the Noctilux. So the Noctilux, as you've seen in my videos, that I enjoyed it, but also there are a few things that I kind of, couldn't wrap my head around. I know, looking at them at a critical standpoint, that is, because the lens is a charmer, but if I were to criticize it, its main drawbacks were always the color fringing and the fact that it has that field curvature. The Nokton here actually has less field curvature than the Noctilux, so I actually did a few comparison shots to the same locations that I took the Noctilux to, and the Nokton in the same similar environments with the same tests. The Nokton produces less field curvature, so your subject separation is actually much more harmonic, whereas with the Noctilux, it just produces this incredible glob of bokeh where you just can't make anything out in the center portion of your frame, but as you get towards the edges, things start to get a little bit more in focus, your depth of field increases. So it creates a swirly look, which is very pleasing, as does this lens, but to a lesser degree. And what was really fascinating about the Nokton is that the Nokton doesn't have too much definition in its bokeh balls, and it still produces a nice swirly effect to it. So towards the edges of the frames, as the field curvature starts stepping in, you start to notice the bokeh kind of does like a circular motion, and it's very dramatic, very pleasing. And I really enjoyed it for that, because it brings a nice character into the image, because otherwise it's very modern looking. The skin tones, the sharpness are very nice. The only thing that I could really complain about, I guess, about this lens with is the chromatic aberrations, which I'm not complaining too much about because it's very manageable. All I had to do was just take a slider and slide it down. Bokeh fringing is really at a minimum on this thing. I didn't notice it too much. It didn't really get in the way, but chromatic aberration on high contrast areas can happen and will happen. And unfortunately, it being a very, very fast aperture lens, you have to watch out for that quite often, because at least for me, I'm not accustomed to the speed, and metering for it took some getting used to, and I'm still not entirely used to it. An ND filter would definitely help. So sharp across the frame, stopping it down, it gets sharper and sharper. The vignetting wide open, this lens, as I speak right now, I do not have the lens profile in Lightroom for it. They have not released it. I tried to get one. I put the 50 f1.1 Nokton profile to see what it does. It does, fix a bit of the vignetting, but I just don't want to judge a lens off of another lens's profile, so I'm not going to speak about that too much, but it's just to say the vignetting definitely dissipates really predictably as you stop down. The aperture stops are very well defined, unlike the TT Artisans that I tried, where I found the brightness kind of fluctuated and you get like weird casts and flares coming in as you stop the lens down. The Noctilux was very good as well for that. It better be for the price they asked for it. And this guy, very, very good. So stopping it down, very predictable, very well calibrated, no focus shift. So that's freaking amazing. No focus shift, color fringing, sharp, pleasing bokeh, crazy good colors, and lots of 3D pop. And that's really what you're gonna buy this lens for, because I had it for the time I had, and I really never wanted to shoot it stop down, because if I'm shooting this thing stop down, I'm gonna go for a Summilux. I'm gonna go for a slower lens if I'm gonna stop this lens down, because you are still dealing with the size at the end of the day, right? It's something that you have to overcome. So using it user experience wise, the rendering, I loved it. It's a great tool. I really like this lens. I gave it to Emma when we were doing a wedding the other day with it, and she loved it. And whenever I test the lens out and Emma likes the lens, that's when you know it's a good lens. So this lens really, really freaking shines. I gave it to her without explaining much info about it, and she put it on her camera. She was shooting on the Sony a7R II with it, and I just was looking at her face as she was using it, and she just started grinning, and I'm like, okay, she gets it. And she just said, wow, this lens is amazing. And she preferably uses the 50 Summilux all the time when we do weddings, and she said this could be a viable alternative, if not a complementary lens to the Summilux. Because what this lens does that the Summilux doesn't is it produces very, very contrast-rich images without that kind of veiled, low contrast look that you do get from the Summilux. So the Summilux has a dreamy quality to it. The bokeh is definitely cleaner than the bokeh coming out of this, but it's also a bit more modern looking, and the overall rendering is a little bit more muted. So the colors are great on the Summilux, but the overall contrast is just a little bit more subdued, whereas this guy just punches. It reminds me so much of the 50 Noctilux, the 0.95, and your subjects jump out of the screen when you're looking at them on your camera, and then when you get home, it's just the same thing. The subject separation is there, it's pronounced, there's no veiling, there's no flaring even. The flare resistance on this lens is very, very good. I tried very hard to get some harsh flares out of it. All it did was just produce very pleasing flares. If you were to have this lens and a close focus adapter on like an SL2 or an SL2S, you could do an entire wedding without even flinching with it. Having the 35 Distagon at my disposal and this guy, I mean, that could be my desert island lens group, because they're both phenomenal lenses that require very little post-production work to get very pleasing results out of. And that, as a working professional, is super desirable, because I look at the images I took with this, even from the engagement shoot that we did, and I just barely had to do anything. I had to slightly touch a few things here and there, but really the pictures are just great out of the box. And that is huge because this saves me so much time. And the fact that this lens costs half as much as a freaking Summilux makes it even more appealing. So the rendering is classic, it's punchy, it's three-dimensional, and what is really nice about it is that you can isolate anything with it. When I was doing my test shots of the boat, which was about, let's say, 20, 30 feet away from me, I had to focus at infinity beyond the boat, and I noticed the boat wasn't even in focus. That's how shallow the depth of field is on this lens. So missing your shots is definitely a thing that you have to look out for, because my hit rate with this, my keeper rate, was like 30%. I missed so many shots, and I can say I'm a very well-versed Leica user. I'm very well experienced, and I know my focusing really well, and it's rare that I miss a shot, but I missed so many, just like I did with the 50 Noctilux spherical, just like I missed with the TT Artisans, and with the 50 Summilux as well. Those are lenses where you're gonna really test your rangefinder focusing capabilities to the extremes. This lens is no exception, and of course, you just want to taking more shots, and when in doubt, reframe, refocus. You know, it's not a big deal. Whenever I would have to worry about critical focusing, I would take 2 shots. I would hit the shutter twice just to be safe, especially if it's a very important shot. And that was it. And one of those 2 shots was usually good. If not, I would take a third and bet you that third shot was good. So watch out for that. But I really, once again, I can't stop talking about how nice the images are out of this lens. I can tell you that every picture I took with it was really nice, effortlessly easy. And that's the best thing about this lens. It's the biggest quality this thing has to bring to the table, is every picture you take with it, you know it's going to be good. The sharpness at f1 is outstanding. I really didn't expect this lens to be that good. I remember seeing some people post pictures on forums or even the test shots, and I thought they have to be manipulated to some extent, but no, Voigtlander really pulled it off with this lens. At f1, you can use this lens for anything. Obviously, don't use it for night landscapes, because there is Coma that's going to pop into your bright light sources towards the edge of the frames, and just stop it down if you're going to do that, because it does get better as you stop down. But once again, not the lens for this. Otherwise, wonderful, wonderful image quality. The skin tones look pleasing. There's really just a flat field. You know, your depth of field is consistent throughout the range. Whatever's in focus, you could place your subject anywhere in that depth of field, in that focus point that you put at. So if you're focusing at 1 meter away, your subject will be just as sharp, if not a little bit less sharp, in the edge of the frame than they would be in the middle, which is really wonderful, because my 50 Summilux does not do that, and the Noctilux did not do that either. So this lens, as far as professional work goes, this is really a no-brainer if you ask me. If you don't have a 50 Summilux and you want to get something really crazy, if you're in the market for a fast, fun lens that you want to impress yourself with, this is it. This is going to light that fire. The bokeh is very classic, like I said, not too defined, very creamy and organic. It's like a hybrid between the 35 Distagon, which has wonderful, smooth, creamy bokeh, and the 50 Noctilux spherical. So the Noctilux, as I said, has that nice gooey glob in the middle where your subject just looks like they're about to jump out at you. But without the field curvature, it's like a mix between that and the Distagon, if I were to say. And that's pretty much it. You know, stopping this lens down only makes it sharper. As you get to f4, f5.6, you're starting to get into the juicy goodness of the sharpest this thing can get. At f8, it is tack sharp. There's nothing more I want out of the lens. After this lens stops down at f8, it's perfection. Then as you obviously get down, diffraction can start setting in, but I didn't notice it too much. I'll have to check out my images, but I guess I won't mention in this video. But really, I wouldn't shoot this lens down past f8, because it's at f1, so do the math. And the other thing I was going to say was the vignetting, wide open. It's there. It's prevalent. Once they release a color profile for this, lens profile for this, we'll see if they can actually accommodate for that vignette. If not, no big deal. You can just adjust for it in post. It wasn't too distracting, wasn't too crazy. Same thing for stopping down. It remedies itself real quick. At f4, it's pretty much entirely gone. 5.6 gone. f8 gone. The vignetting is actually very predictable, and The color fringing was also very predictable. Bokeh fringing was at a minimal. The definition towards the edges of the frame, obviously you do lose a bit of that bokeh, and then you get those kind of outline bokeh balls that kind of look rectangular in shape that you tend to get from these modern lenses. And the last thing was the 12 blades. They're wonderful. The bokeh balls are nice and circular. They do get defined because they're straight cut. So sun stars you're gonna get. Bokeh balls are gonna be a little bit outlined, but they're never distracting. And this lens at f1.4 is like all I would ever ask from a lens. It gets so much, like it's already perfectly sharp at f1, f2 it's tack sharp for what you need. And then, like I said, stopping that gets sharper. And that's pretty much it. It's an inspiring lens. It's wonderful for portraits. It's like having an 85mm 1.4 at a 50mm frame focal length, so that's very, very welcome. And it is balanced, and it's not as much as a burden as any other big lens, big fast lenses, which is really, really welcome. Voigtlander, you did it again. I'm very, very pleased with this lens, and I will be buying this lens. I'm just gonna say it. In the next year or two, I can expect myself to add this to my arsenal. I'm freaking blown away by it. The only drawback is probably the color fringing, but that is super manageable, and it doesn't fringe in the bokeh balls as bad as other lenses that share this kind of focal length and speed. This really is all I want from a fast lens and more. So that's my take on the 50mm f1 from Voigtlander. It is a wonderful lens that I do not look forward to giving back. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to support the channel by liking and subscribing. And let me know what you guys think about it in the comments below. Are you guys gonna get one of these? Are you any more inclined on getting a Speedy 50? Let me know. We'll talk in the comments. Ciao.